They took my late wife's rocking chair and called it junk. They took my workshop and called it Cody's now. They stood in the doorway of a room I built with my own two hands and said, "It's basically already done." A man I'd met twice started measuring my plasma table for a trailer hitch. My own son looked at the floor and said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just let them keep loading the truck. And then I made one phone call to a woman named Diane Ostrom and told her it was time to read the lease out loud. But before the phone call, there was a Tuesday morning and a tape measure and a man in my shop who had no idea what he was standing on. My name is Vernon Aldrich. I am 72 years old. I did not raise my voice that morning. I did not need to. I came out to the workshop on a Tuesday, coffee still warm in my hand. And there he was, my daughter-in-law's brother, measuring my plasma table for a trailer hitch. Tape out, little notebook, writing numbers down like the table already belonged to him. His name was Cody Gill. I'd met him maybe twice in 8 years. He looked up at me, smiled the way a man smiles when he thinks he's already won something. "Morning, Vern," he said, "just getting some measurements." I set my coffee down on the workbench. Didn't ask him what for. I already had a bad feeling. And a bad feeling in my experience is usually right. "Measurements for what?" I said. "Heather didn't tell you?" He said it easy, like it was nothing, like he was talking about borrowing a ladder. "She said the shop's basically mine now. Said you weren't really using it much since your wife passed." I looked at that plasma table. I built the base myself, 3-inch box tube, back when Marion was still alive, to hand me the level and tell me it wasn't quite square yet. I looked at the cedar walls in the back room. She picked that cedar out at a lumber yard in Sheridan, 30 years before this man was born. Then I looked at him, standing in the middle of my whole life like it was a garage sale he'd gotten to early. I didn't yell at him. I want to be plain about that. It matters what I did instead. I picked my coffee back up. I said, "Is that right?" Then I walked into the house. I called my son. Todd didn't pick up for 2 rings. That told me plenty. When he did, his voice had that flat sound a man gets when he's already decided not to fight about something. "Dad, hey, listen, I was going to call you about that. About Cody standing in my shop with a tape measure." Dad, it's not a big deal." Heather thought, since you're not really building anything big anymore, that maybe Cody could use the space. He's got his own rig. He just needs somewhere to work out of. It's basically already done. We just didn't want to make a whole thing out of it. Basically already done. I turned that phrase over more than once that week. A man says that about a decision he made without you. He says it when he already knows how you'll feel about it. "Whose name is on that building, Todd?" I said. There was a pause, the kind where you can hear a man deciding whether honesty is worth the trouble. "I mean, it's on our land, Dad." Technically, I said, and I let that sit in the phone line a second. "We'll talk Sunday." I hung up before he could answer. I'm not a man who slams things down. I set the phone on the counter. Quiet. The way you'd set down a wrench you didn't need anymore. I should tell you plainly who I am. The rest of this only makes sense if you know where I started. I am Vernon Earl Aldrich, 72 years old. I built Aldrich Custom Fab out of a rented pole barn on Anvil Road in Cutbank Junction, Wyoming. 41 years ago. One arc welder, bought second-hand for $210. A truck that barely ran. I built oil field trailers. I built livestock chutes for half the ranches in this county. I built truck beds so tough men still drive them 25 years later and wave at me at the feed store. I did not inherit a dime of what I have. I built it with my hands, my back, and a wife who believed in me before there was any evidence to. Marion Fay Aldrich. My wife for 46 years. She died 2 winters ago. A stroke. Fast in the kitchen. On a Thursday. I was in the shop when it happened. I didn't get there in time to say goodbye the way I wanted to. That's a fact I carry every single day. It's the only fact in this whole story that still has the power to put me on the ground. She used to sit in the back room of that workshop in a rocking chair, reading while I worked into the night. I built that back room the year we married. 46 years ago. Cedar walls, a wood stove. A window facing east so she'd get the morning light. It was never a storage room. It was hers. So when I say a man stood in my shop, measuring my plasma table for a trailer hitch, understand what he was actually standing inside of. 41 years of work, 46 years of marriage. He didn't know it. Worse, nobody had told him. Nobody in my family had ever bothered to ask what any of it was actually worth, or who it actually belonged to. I want to tell you about Sunday dinner. That's where the shape of the whole thing came into the light. We eat at the Cutbank Junction Grange Hall most Sundays. Marion started that tradition, back when the kids were small. A big table, folding chairs, a potluck the whole extended family shows up for. Todd and Heather. Heather's brother Cody, when he's in town, which lately was often. A scattering of cousins. I still go every week. It's one of the only places I still feel like part of something. Marion's chair at my own kitchen table has been empty 2 winters running. Heather Gill Aldrich married my son 8 years ago. She's 37. Not a stupid woman. I want to be fair here because fair is the only thing I'm ever trying to be. She's sharp. She's organised. And she spent 8 years getting very good at making decisions sound like they were already agreed to before anyone else had a chance to think. That Sunday, she brought it up over the green beans, casual as weather. "So Cody's going to start moving his equipment into the shop next week," she said. "We figured we'd get it done before the weather turns." I set my fork down. I don't recall agreeing to that. Vernon. She said my name the way you'd correct a child. You haven't built anything out there in almost a year. It's just sitting there. Cody's got real contracts lined up, oil field repair work, and he needs a shop with power and a lift. It doesn't make sense for that space to just sit empty. "It's not empty," I said. "It's mine." "It's on family land," Todd said quietly, not quite looking at me. "I mean, technically, Dad, it's kind of all one property." I looked at my son. 44 years old, he still can't finish a sentence about money in front of his wife without checking her face first. "Todd," I said, "whose name is on the deed to that shop building?" Silence. Heather's mother, 2 seats down, suddenly found her potato salad very interesting. Cody, at the far end of the table, kept eating like none of it concerned him. That told me he already knew more than he was letting on. "I don't know the specifics," Todd said, "but it's on our land." "It's on my land," I said, quiet. "There's a difference between our and family, and a bigger difference between those and mine." "I built that shop before you were born, Todd. Your mother picked the cedar for the back wall. I'm not signing anything. I did not agree to anyone moving equipment into a building I still own and still use." Heather's jaw tightened, just slightly, the way it does when a plan she thought was settled hits a wall she didn't expect. "Nobody's asking you to sign anything today," she said, too smooth. "We just figured you'd want to help Cody out. Family helps family." "Family asks," I said. "Family doesn't measure the equipment before they've had the conversation." Nobody said anything to that. Cody kept eating. Todd looked at his plate like it might have an answer written on it. Heather smiled, the kind of smile that isn't really a smile, and changed the subject to the church picnic. I drove home that night with both hands on the wheel and my jaw set tight. I want to tell you, the anger wasn't the loudest thing in me. The loudest thing was a quiet, cold certainty. This had already been decided, somewhere I wasn't in the room for. Whatever was coming next was coming, whether I agreed to it or not. I'm not a man who panics. 41 years running my own shop teaches you that. Panic breaks more welds than heat ever does. So I didn't panic. I went home. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, going cold in front of me. I thought about a piece of paper I hadn't looked at in 11 years. 11 years back, on the advice of an accountant who's long retired now, I put Aldrich Custom Fab into a limited liability company. Did it quietly, the way you do most smart things, without a parade. I leased the shop building and every piece of equipment inside it to that company. A 99-year lease, recorded properly at the county courthouse in Sheridan. The kind of document that sits in a drawer for over a decade because nobody needs it. Right up until the day somebody desperately does. Nobody in my family had ever asked to see that deed. Not once, in 11 years. They assumed. Heather assumed the shop sat on family land, and that made it family property, hers to hand to her brother like a housewarming gift. My own son assumed the same thing. It was easier than asking his father a hard question at a dinner table. I finished my coffee, looked out the kitchen window at the shop. Dark now, the plasma table sitting quiet under its cover. Marion's old rocking chair still in the back room, where it had sat for 2 winters, ever since I stopped being able to move it without my chest tightening up. I thought about a promise I made her. One night 20 years back, when her father's farm got split up in a family fight so ugly it put two brothers in a courtroom against each other for 6 years. She made me promise, right there in that rocking chair, the shop and the house would never split apart from each other, not while either of us was breathing. I picked up the phone. It was late, near 10, but I called anyway. "Diane," I said when she answered. "It's Vernon Aldrich. I'm sorry for the hour. I need you to pull a file for me. The LLC lease from 11 years back. I think it's about to matter a great deal more than anybody in my family realizes." There was a pause on the line. Then Diane Ostrom, who's kept my affairs straight for 9 years and never once needed me to explain myself twice, said the only thing that mattered. "I'll have it Monday morning, Vernon. Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the tape measure, about the green beans and the technically, about a man named Cody Gill, already measuring equipment that had never, not for one single day, belonged to anybody but me. I didn't tell her I was angry. Anger wasn't really what I felt. What I felt was closer to what you feel, standing under a roof you built with your own hands, finally understanding that the people under it with you have started talking, quietly, about tearing it down. I was not going to let that happen. Not to the shop, not to Marion's cedar walls, not to a life I built one weld at a time, out of nothing, for 41 years. I just wasn't going to shout about it. Shouting never fixed one single thing in my life. Paperwork did. Monday morning I drove the 40 minutes into Sheridan. Thermos of coffee. A folder I hadn't opened in over a decade. Diane Ostrom's office sits on Main Street, 2 blocks from the bank, above a hardware store that's been there longer than I have. She's 61, sharp as a new blade. Doesn't waste words. I've always respected that about her. "Sit down, Vernon," she said, sliding a manila folder across her desk. "I pulled it Friday night. You were right to call." I opened it. There it was, 11 years old. My own signature at the bottom, notarized, recorded at the county courthouse the same week I signed it. Aldrich Custom Fab, LLC. Lease of real property and fixtures. 99 years. The building on Anvil Road, and every machine bolted to its floor. 99 years, Diane said. "You could be dead 100 years and that lease still runs. The LLC owns the use of that building and everything in it, Vernon. Not your son, not your daughter-in-law. The company does. And the company, I said, is you. 100% sole member, since the day you formed it." She tapped the page. "Nobody transferred anything. Nobody can transfer anything, not without your signature as the LLC's sole authorized member. If your daughter-in-law's brother moves so much as a toolbox into that building without your say-so, he's trespassing on leased commercial property, plain and simple." I sat with that a long moment. 41 years of work, and the smartest thing I ever did for it happened on a Tuesday afternoon, 11 years back, filling out paperwork I barely remember signing. An accountant told me it would save on taxes, protect the business if a customer ever sued. I never once imagined the thing it would end up protecting me from was my own family. "Does Todd know this exists?" Diane asked. "I don't believe he's ever seen it," I said. "I don't believe Heather has either. They've been operating on the idea that if the shop sits on family land, the shop is family property. Nobody asked, nobody checked." "That's usually how these things go," Diane said. "People build a whole plan on an assumption because asking a direct question feels rude. Then the assumption turns out to be worth nothing at all." She closed the folder. "What do you want to do with this, Vernon? You could go over there today and end this in one conversation." I thought about it. I really did. Ending it clean right then, driving straight to Todd's place, laying that lease on his kitchen table, before Cody wasted one more week planning around equipment he was never going to touch. But I've built enough things in my life to know something. The strongest structure isn't the one you finish fast. It's the one you let cure properly before you put any weight on it. "Not yet," I said. "I want to see how far they're willing to go first. I want it in writing, in their own words, exactly what they intended to do with equipment that was never theirs. And there's something else." "What's that?" "Marion kept a ledger," I said. "Every job I ever fabricated for 41 years, she wrote it down. Dates, customers, what we charged, what materials cost. She was better with the books than I ever was. I haven't been able to find it since she passed. I think it went into the back room with everything else. after the funeral, and I haven't had the stomach to go through that room properly. Diane looked at me a long moment. The way a person looks at you when they understand exactly what a piece of paper like that might mean, beyond the money. If that ledger exists and it's accurate, she said, it does two things for you. Proves the value of that equipment beyond any argument. In her own handwriting. Worth more in a room full of family than any number I could put in a legal letter, and it gives you something to hold on to that has nothing to do with any of this ugliness. I drove home that afternoon thinking about Marion more than I'd let myself in months. I thought about her in that rocking chair, pencil in hand, calling out numbers while I welded. 68 for the propane truck bracket, Vernon. Don't you dare charge Ed Tarver a penny less. Her voice carrying over the hiss of the torch, like she was standing right beside the work instead of 10 feet back, in a cedar-walled room built just for her. I want to tell you about the ranch call. It happened that same week. And it matters because it shows you exactly the kind of thing Heather was calling a hobby that ties up good real estate. Wade Pruitt runs cattle 20 minutes south of town, on a spread his family's worked for 3 generations. His stock trailer axle had gone out of true, bent in a highway accident that could have killed him, and 40 head of cattle both. He brought it into my shop on a flatbed. Heather happened to be there that same afternoon, dropping off a casserole dish she'd borrowed months back, standing in the doorway watching. I didn't measure that axle with a gauge first. I never do, not at first. I picked up a hammer, tapped it in 4 places, and listened. There, I said, pointing to a spot 8 inches off centre. That's your problem, right there. Metal's true everywhere else. It's just that one section, warped from the impact. Wade squinted at the axle. How in the hell can you tell that just by tapping it? Sounds different where the metal's stressed, I said. True steel rings clean. Stressed steel rings flat, dull, like knocking on a hollow log, instead of a solid one. You learn the difference after you've fixed about 10,000 of them. I fixed that axle in 90 minutes. Charged Wade $340, labour, and materials. A dealership in Sheridan would have quoted him $1,100 and taken 2 weeks doing it. Wade shook my hand hard on the way out, the way men do when they know you just saved them real money and real trouble. Heather watched the whole thing from the doorway, arms crossed, that casserole dish still in her hands. That's a nice trick, she said, once Wade's truck pulled out. Still seems like a lot of equipment, and a lot of building for one old man doing the occasional favour for a rancher friend. $340 for 90 minutes of work, I said, with equipment I own free and clear, is not a hobby, Heather. It's a business that's been running longer than you've been alive. I'm just saying, she said, Cody could be doing that same kind of work, generating that same kind of income, if he had a real shop instead of working out of a borrowed bay and a truck. Cody can build his own shop, I said. The way I built mine? One weld at a time. She didn't answer that. Just set the casserole dish down on my workbench, the same one Marion used to lean against reading her paperback while I worked, and left without another word. That same week, I noticed something else, small at the time. I didn't understand the weight of it until later. Marion had planted a row of climbing roses along the south wall of the shop, 22 years back, the year we added the back room. She tended them every summer after that, right up until she got too sick to kneel in the dirt. I'd kept them alive since she passed, clumsy about it, watering on a schedule I mostly guessed at. They still bloomed every June, deep red, the same colour as the dress she wore the day I proposed to her outside a diner in Sheridan 48 years ago. Heather stopped by again that Thursday, this time with Todd, ostensibly to drop off paperwork about the Grange Hall's holiday potluck. She stood by the rosebed a long moment, studying it the way a person studies something they're already pricing in their head. These roses take up half the good sunlight along that wall, she said. If Cody's going to run a mobile rig out of here eventually, he'll need clear space to load and unload without snagging his gear on all this. She nudged one bloom with her shoe, not quite touching it hard enough to break it, but close. Might make sense to just clear this whole bed out. Those roses were my wife's, I said, and I kept my voice level, though something in my chest had gone tight and cold. She planted them the year we built the back room, 22 years ago. I understand that, Vernon, Heather said, in the tone of a woman who did not understand that at all, but sentiment doesn't really factor into workspace efficiency. It's just plants. You can always plant new ones somewhere else. Todd, to his credit, said something that week that I hadn't expected from him. Heather, Those are Mom's roses. We're not touching those. She looked at him, surprised, like she hadn't expected pushback on something so small. I'm just being practical, Todd. Some things aren't about practical, he said, quiet but firm enough that she let it drop, at least for that day. I didn't say much more about it in the moment. But I want you to understand what that exchange told me, plainer than almost anything else that whole year. It told me Heather did not see the shop as a place that held a life, a marriage, a woman's whole devoted patience, planted in the dirt along one wall for over 2 decades. She saw it as square footage, efficient or inefficient, cleared or uncleared. And once a person starts measuring a life that way, there's very little left standing between them and measuring a person the exact same way. Which is precisely what came next. I want to be fair to Cody. I don't believe he's a cruel young man. Not in the way some people are cruel. I believe he's a scared one, in over his head. And scared people do things they wouldn't otherwise do when somebody smarter than them offers a way out. I found out from Wade Pruitt's brother-in-law, who does bookkeeping in town and hears things, that Cody had taken out a loan of $48,000, a mobile welding rig and a used flatbed truck, chasing oil-field repair contracts that dried up fast, once 2 of the bigger operators cut their maintenance budgets. Heather, it turned out, had co-signed part of that loan, a detail she'd never mentioned to my son. Not once in all the months this had apparently been building. I didn't go looking for that information. It found me, the way most true things do in a small town, if you're patient enough to let people talk. I thought about Cody's rig sitting in my driveway one Saturday. Just borrowing power for a job, he'd said, running an extension cord straight off my panel, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I let him. Didn't say a word. A man who's about to overreach usually keeps overreaching until somebody stops him. I've learned that the hard way in 41 years of business. The smartest thing you can do with a man like that is let him keep walking, until he's walked exactly far enough. Sunday dinner came around again. Heather brought it up before the plates were even passed. Cody's got the flatbed lined up for next weekend, she said. We were thinking Saturday morning, if that works for everybody. Works for what, exactly? I said. Moving his equipment in, she said, like she'd already said it a dozen times and was tired of repeating herself. We talked about this, Vernon. You talked about it, I said. I listened. Those aren't the same thing. Todd shifted in his chair. Dad, come on, it's just space. It's not like you're using half of it anymore. I'm using every square foot of it, I said. Fixed Wade Pruitt's stock trailer axle in it 3 days ago. 2 more jobs booked for next month. That shop generates real income, Todd. Has for 41 years. And no one has shown me one single piece of paper that says anyone but me decides what happens inside it. It's not that serious, Dad, Todd said. There it was again. That flat, tired voice of a man who's already decided the path of least resistance is worth more than the truth. I looked at my son a long moment. I thought about the day I taught him to strike an arc. 12 years old, goggles too big for his face. So proud of himself when he laid his first clean bead. I thought about how far that boy had travelled. From a man who'd stand up for what was true, even at his own dinner table. Saturday, I said, you all come on out to the shop, if that's really what you want to do. Bring the flatbed. Bring Cody. I'll be there. Heather smiled. That same smile from before, the one that isn't really a smile. Good, she said. See, that wasn't so hard. I smiled back at her, and I meant it, though not for any reason she understood yet. No, I said. It wasn't hard at all. That week I finally went into the back room. I hadn't cleaned it out properly since the funeral. Marion's rocking chair still sat by the wood stove, a folded quilt over the armrest, her reading glasses on the little side table. Right where she'd left them the last morning, she was well. I'd go in there sometimes just to sit, just to be near what was hers. But I hadn't touched a thing. Not the glasses. Not the quilt. Not the paperbacks on the shelf she built herself out of scrap cedar. Heather had said more than once that the back room needed clearing out, that the chair was just an old thing taking up space, that donating it or hauling it to the dump would make the shop feel more usable for Cody's equipment. She said it in front of Todd, casual, like she was suggesting we repaint a fence. I sat down in that chair for the first time in 2 winters. It creaked the way it always had. Same worn joint on the left rocker I'd meant to fix for Marion a dozen times and never did. I ran my hand along the seam, where the cushion met the frame. An old habit. The way you touch something familiar without thinking why, the seam gave a little under my fingers. Not torn, just loose, like it had been opened and re-sewn by hand. I sat forward and worked my fingers into the gap. Something inside, firm, rectangular, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag gone brittle with age. I pulled it out slow, careful. The way you'd handle something you already suspected mattered more than you were ready for. It was a ledger. A real one, cloth-bound. The kind you buy at an office supply store. The cover worn soft at the corners. I opened it. There was Marion's handwriting. Small, neat, slanted, just slightly to the right. The same handwriting that used to leave notes on my lunch sandwiches. 40 years running. Every job, every single job I ever fabricated, going back to the very first year. 1985. A livestock gate for a rancher named Earl Dunning. Charged at $40. Materials, $11. She'd tracked every dollar that came through that shop for 41 straight years. Right up until the week before she passed. The entries getting shakier near the end, but never stopping. I sat in that chair a long time, turning pages, watching 4 decades of my own life pass by in her handwriting. There was a note tucked into the back cover, folded twice. I almost missed it. I opened it. My hands went still. Vernon, if you're reading this, you finally sat down in my chair long enough to find it. I always knew you would, once you were ready. I kept every number because someday, somebody would try to tell you what this shop was worth. Or worse, what it wasn't. I wasn't going to let anybody but you decide that. This equipment made this family more money than anybody who didn't sweat for it will ever understand. Don't let anyone talk you out of what you built. Promise me the shop and the house stay together, as long as there's breath in either one of us. I love you. I always have. Marion. I read that note 4 times before I could stand back up. I called Diane Ostrom the next morning, and my voice wasn't quite steady, and I didn't try to hide that from her. I found the ledger, I said. Vernon, that's remarkable. What's in it? 41 years, I said. Every job, every dollar, in her own hand. And a note. She knew Diane. She knew this day might come, 20 years before it did. Bring it in, Diane said. That ledger, together with the lease, is going to be worth more in that room than any argument either of us could construct with a law degree. I want to tell you what happened 2 days later. It's the moment the whole shape of this thing changed. It didn't come from me. It came from a phone call Diane made on my behalf. One I hadn't even asked her to make. Diane had a contact at a regional bank in Sheridan. A loan officer she'd worked with on other estate matters for years. A man who owed her a favour from a closing that had gone sideways 2 years back. One she'd helped clean up. She called him. Careful. Professional. Not asking him to break any confidence. Just a general question about commercial equipment financing in the county. The kind of question a lawyer asks when she's protecting a client's interests. What came back wasn't what either of us expected. Vernon, she said. When she called me that evening, Cody Gill's loan isn't just behind. It's already flagged for pre-repossession review. The bank sent formal notice 3 weeks ago. He has, at most, 6 weeks before that flatbed and that mobile rig get physically repossessed, loan default, $48,000 outstanding, and Heather's name is on a personal guarantee for $11,000 of it. I sat with that. 6 weeks. Not the vague, distant someday Heather kept implying. Cody's contract's coming through eventually. 6 weeks, and a truck was coming for that equipment regardless of what happened with my shop. She's not trying to get Cody a workspace, I said slowly, working it out loud. She's trying to buy him time before the bank finds out he's already lost the collateral. If Cody's working out of my shop, using my power, my tools, my address even, maybe it looks to a lender like he's got real infrastructure behind him. Buys them a few more weeks to figure something out. That's exactly what it looks like from where I'm sitting, Diane said. And there's more. My contact mentioned, off the record, that Heather's personal guarantee could follow her separately from Cody. Garnishments, her own credit, potentially even joint accounts she shares with your son, if it goes to collections. She has every reason in the world to want this resolved quietly and fast, before Todd finds out how deep she's in it. I thought about Todd, sitting at that dinner table saying, "It's not that serious, Dad." No idea his wife had personally guaranteed part of an $11,000 loan for a business already circling a bank's repossession list. I thought about how much of this whole plan was built on nobody in my family ever asking a direct question. I want you there Saturday, I told Diane, when they bring the flatbed. I want you to bring the lease, and I want you to be ready to read it out loud, in front of all of them, the moment Cody starts loading that plasma table. You don't want to warn Todd first. Privately. I thought about that a long moment. Part of me, the part that still remembered a 12-year-old boy, proud of his first clean weld, wanted to spare my son the public part. Wanted to call him aside and lay it out quiet, private, man to man. But I thought about 8 years of watching that same boy check his wife's face before finishing a sentence about money. And I understood something Marion had probably understood long before I did. Todd wasn't going to hear this right unless he heard it exactly the way he'd let it happen. In the open, in front of everybody, with no room left for anyone to soften it. No, I said, he needs to hear it standing in the room where it happens, not from me telling him quietly beforehand, not from Heather explaining it away. After, he needs to watch the whole thing land, same as everyone else. Diane was quiet a moment. All right, Vernon. Saturday then. I hung up the phone, walked out to the shop one more time that night, stood in the back room a long while, Marion's ledger in my hands, her note folded inside the cover where I could find it easy. I looked at the plasma table, at the certified pressure vessel rig I'd bought second-hand and rebuilt myself 15 years back. At every tool, on every wall, Cody Gill had measured for a trailer hitch like it was already his. I did not feel angry standing there. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was closer to steadiness. The same feeling, right before I strike an arc on a difficult weld. Knowing exactly where the joint needs to be, exactly how much heat it can take before it fails, exactly how it's going to look once it's done right. I set the ledger down on the workbench, right where Marion used to lean and read while I worked. Turned off the lights, went inside to wait for Saturday. The days between that call and Saturday morning were some of the strangest of my whole life. I kept living like nothing had changed. Went to the feed store, fixed a broken gate hinge for a widow 2 roads over, charged her nothing, the way I always have for widows since Marion passed. Some debts a man pays quietly and never mentions again. I let Heather see me exactly as calm as I'd always been. I think that calm unsettled her more than any argument could have. She called me Wednesday evening, her voice light, testing the ground. Just confirming Saturday's still good, she said. Cody's got the flatbed rented from 9 to 2. Saturday's fine, I said. I'll be there all morning. You seem, I don't know, okay with this now, she said. And there was something underneath the words, a little fishing for reassurance. I told you I'd be there Saturday, I said. That's exactly what I meant. She let it go. I don't think she trusted the calm, but she wanted to. Trusting it was easier than doubting it. Thursday I drove out to see Wade Pruitt. Not for business, just to sit on his porch and talk the way 2 old men do, when one of them needs somebody who isn't tangled up in his family. You look like a man carrying something heavy, Wade said, handing me a coffee. I am, I said. Then I told him, all of it, the tape measure, the dinner table, the lease, the ledger, Marion's note. Wade listened the whole way through without interrupting once. Rare thing in a man his age. Most of them can't help themselves. When I finished, he sat quiet a long moment, looking out at his own cattle grazing in the distance. 40 years I've known you, Vernon, he said. You fixed my daddy's equipment before you fixed mine. Never once padded a bill. Never once told a customer a job cost more than it did. That workshop is the most honest business in this whole county. I mean that plain, not as flattery. He looked at me. You do what you got to do Saturday. Anybody in this town who's brought you a broken axle knows exactly whose name belongs on that building. That meant more to me than I expected. A man spends 41 years building something with his hands. Somewhere along the way, he starts to wonder if anybody besides himself remembers what it took. Wade remembered. So did half the ranchers in that county, if I'd bothered to ask. I hadn't needed to. Not yet. Friday night, I had one more conversation, and it was the hardest one. Todd came by alone, without Heather. That told me something in him. Already suspected the ground was shifting. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one he'd eaten breakfast at as a boy. He looked older than his 44 years, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Dad, he said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. I'm always straight with you, Todd, I said. It's usually the only thing that gets me in trouble. Is there a reason you agreed to Saturday so easy? Heather thinks you've come around. I don't think that's it. I think you know something we don't. I looked at my son a long moment. I thought about protecting him from what was coming. Same instinct as before, the instinct to spare him the public part of it. Todd, I said, did you know your wife co-signed part of Cody's loan for that welding rig? He blinked. What? $11,000 of it. Personal guarantee, her name on the paper same as his. Did you know that? No, he said, and his voice had gone quiet, careful. She never said anything about that. Did you know that loan is already flagged for repossession? That the bank's coming for that flatbed and that rig inside of 6 weeks, whether Cody's got a shop to work out of or not? Todd sat very still. How do you know that? Because I asked the right people the right questions, Todd. Something nobody in this family thought to do before deciding my shop belonged to somebody else. I let that sit a moment, went on gentler, because I could see it landing on him the way a hard truth lands on a man who spent years avoiding it. I don't think your wife is trying to help her brother build a business, son. I think she's trying to buy him time before the bank finds out he's already lost everything. Using my shop, my equipment, my name, to make that stall a little longer. That's not, she wouldn't, he said it. But I watched his own certainty crack a little as the words left his mouth. Some part of him had already started doing the math himself. I'm not asking you to believe me over her, I said. I'm asking you to be in that shop Saturday morning, with your own eyes open, and watch what happens when the truth gets set down on the table in front of everybody. Watch it happen. Don't take my word or hers. Just watch. Todd didn't say much after that. Sat a while longer, quiet. Before he left, he did something he hadn't done in longer than I'd like to admit. He hugged me. Hard. The way he used to as a boy after I'd been gone on a long job. I love you, Dad, he said. I don't know what's coming Saturday, but I love you. I know you do, son, I said. That's the only reason any of this is worth doing carefully instead of loud. He left. I sat at that kitchen table a long while after, thinking about how a man can raise a boy right and still watch him spend 8 years slowly forgetting how. One small surrendered argument at a time, until it takes a stranger's tape measure in his father's shop to wake something back up in him. Saturday morning came in cold and clear, frost still silver on the grass when I walked out to open the shop at 7. I made coffee in the little pot I keep by the wood stove, set Marion's ledger on the workbench, in plain sight, right beside the folder Diane gave me from the county courthouse. I stood in the back room a moment, hand on the arm of Marion's rocking chair, and said the thing out loud I hadn't let myself say all week. I kept my promise, Marion. It stays together. All of it. Then I went and unlocked the big bay door, and I waited. Diane arrived first at 8:30. A full half hour before anybody else was due. Grey coat, leather folder under her arm. She looked around the shop slow, taking it in. The plasma table, the pressure vessel rig, the racks of steel stock along the back wall. This is a serious operation, Vernon, she said. I don't think I ever appreciated that until I saw it with my own eyes. 41 years, I said. Give or take 100,000 welds. What's the equipment worth? All of it, total, if you had to put a number on it. I thought about that a long moment. The plasma table alone, new, runs close to 60,000 today. Mine's older but maintained like a surgeon keeps his instruments. Call it 32,000 at resale. The pressure vessel rig, another 26,000. It's certified, and that certification doesn't transfer easy to just anybody. Add the smaller tools, the racks of stock steel, 2 trailers half finished for customers right now, and you're looking at close to $140,000 sitting in this one building. Diane whistled low, and the building and the ground beneath it, the shop building itself, insured value, $61,000. The 2 acres under it, valued separate from the house, maybe $45,000 more. Nobody would actually split it that way. All told, you're talking north of $240,000. A young man with a tape measure walked in here thinking it was just some old man's unused space. And Cody's total exposure on that loan? 48,000, I said. 11 of it, Heather personally guaranteed. Diane shook her head slow. The math never once made sense for them, Vernon. Even if they'd gotten away with it, even if you'd said yes, it would have solved $11,000 of Heather's exposure for a few extra weeks. at the cost of $240,000 of equipment and property that was never theirs to offer. That's not a plan. That's panic wearing a plan's clothes. I thought about that long time after she said it. It was true. It explained something I hadn't put words to myself. Heather wasn't a mastermind. She was a frightened woman doing frightened math, convincing herself that borrowing legitimacy from my shop's address, my equipment, would buy her brother, and by extension herself, just enough time to figure out something better, before the roof came down on both of them. At 9:15, the flatbed pulled into the driveway. Cody driving, Heather in the passenger seat. Behind them, Todd's truck, Todd himself at the wheel, alone. I noticed that. Heather had ridden with her brother. My son had come by himself. They climbed out. Cody had a hand truck and a set of tie-down straps already looped over his shoulder, moving with the easy confidence of a man who believes the hard part is already behind him. "Morning, Vern," he called out cheerful. "Figured we'd start with the plasma table. Get the heavy stuff loaded first while we've got daylight." "Morning, Cody," I said. "Diane, this is Cody Gill, Heather's brother." "Cody, this is Diane Ostrom, my attorney." Cody's easy smile flickered, just slightly. The way a man's expression does when a word he wasn't expecting lands somewhere unfamiliar. "Attorney," he repeated. "Didn't realize this needed a lawyer, Vern. Thought this was just a family thing." "Everything's a family thing," I said, "right up until somebody needs a piece of paper to settle it. Then it's a legal thing that happens to involve family." Heather's eyes moved from me to Diane to the leather folder in Diane's hand. Quick, calculating. The way she'd looked at every situation in 8 years of family gatherings, hunting for the angle before anybody finished their first sentence. "Vernon," she said. "Careful now. What's going on here?" "Cody wants to move his equipment in," I said. "I told you Saturday I'd be here, and here I am." "Go ahead, Cody. Start with the plasma table, if that's really what you came to do." Cody hesitated half a second, glanced at Heather. She gave him a small nod, the kind that says, "Keep going. Don't let him rattle you." He walked to the plasma table, set the hand truck down, and started unbolting the leg brackets I'd welded into that concrete floor myself 15 years back. I let him get 3 bolts loose before I spoke again. "Before you go any further, Cody, I want you to hear something." I looked at Diane. She opened the leather folder. "Vernon Aldrich formed a limited liability company 11 years ago," Diane said, her voice even, carrying clearly across the shop floor, "called Aldrich Custom Fab, LLC. On that same date, he executed a recorded lease, filed at the Sheridan County Courthouse, leasing this building and every piece of equipment fixed or stored inside it to that LLC for a term of 99 years. She held the document up, turned it so the room could see the county recording stamp in the corner. Vernon Aldrich is the sole member of that LLC, 100% ownership. No transfer of interest, partial or otherwise, has ever been filed, requested, or executed." Cody's hand stopped on the 4th bolt. "What does that mean?" he said, slower now. "It means," Diane said, "that this building, this plasma table, every piece of equipment in this room, and the ground it sits on, legally belongs to a company that Vernon alone controls. Not the family. Not Todd. Not anyone with the surname Aldrich except Vernon himself. If you remove that bolt and take that table off this property, Mr. Gill, you are removing equipment belonging to a business entity, without the consent of its sole owner. That is not a family disagreement. That is theft of leased commercial property, and I have already advised Vernon on his options should that occur." The shop went very quiet. Even the birds outside picked that moment to shut up. "Heather," Cody said, turning to his sister, "you told me this was already sorted. You said Todd talked to his dad." "I did talk to him," Todd said, "and it was the first thing he'd said since arriving, and his voice had an edge in it I hadn't heard from him in years. I told you what she told me to tell you, Cody. I never once saw a deed. I never once asked to see one. I just believed my wife." Heather's face had gone tight. Same jaw clench from Sunday dinner, but no smile behind it this time to soften it. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Vernon, you're really going to stand here and hide behind a company you made up on paper just to keep your brother-in-law from using a shop you barely touch anymore?" "I'm not hiding behind anything, Heather," I said. Kept my voice exactly as even as it had been all along. That had always been the whole point. I'm standing in front of it, in plain sight, with a lawyer a recorded deed, and 41 years of receipts, telling you and everyone here exactly what belongs to who. That's the opposite of hiding. You could have just told us this weeks ago, she snapped, instead of letting us drive out here, rent a flatbed, waste a whole Saturday. I told you Sunday I hadn't agreed to anything, I said. You told me it was basically already done. I let you finish deciding what you thought was settled, because I wanted every person here today to hear the truth land in the same room, at the same time, with nobody able to soften it later. That's not cruelty, Heather. That's fairness. You didn't offer me that same courtesy when you decided my shop was Cody's. I'm not apologising for offering it to you, now on my own terms, in my own building. Cody had backed away from the plasma table entirely now, hands up slightly, like a man who just realised he was standing somewhere he had no right to be. I didn't know, he said quietly, mostly to Heather. You told me this was cleared. You told me the family agreed. It's fine, Cody, Heather said. Too fast, too tight. This is just Vernon being dramatic. We'll figure it out. There's nothing to figure out, Diane said. Calm, final. The equipment stays. The building stays under the LLC's lease. If Mr. Gill needs a workspace, he is welcome to lease or purchase equipment of his own, the same way Vernon did, 41 years ago, starting with nothing. Cody loaded the hand truck back onto the flatbed, without another word. Bolts still half out on the plasma table's brackets. I walked over and finished tightening them myself while everyone watched, quiet like a man closing a door that had briefly been left open to weather. Heather didn't leave right away, stood by the flatbed, arms crossed, watching me work the ratchet. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped the sweetness entirely. You think this is over, she said. You think one piece of paper wins this. I think one piece of paper tells the truth, I said, not looking up from the bolt. Whether that ends anything is entirely up to you. You're 72 years old, Vernon. You really think you're going to keep running this shop by yourself forever? Todd and I are the ones who'll have to deal with all this eventually. The house, the shop, whatever's left of it. Whether you plan for it or not. I set the ratchet down, looked at her straight for the first time that morning. Is that what this was really about? Not helping your brother? Getting ahead of what happens to this place once I'm gone? She didn't answer that directly. That told me plenty. Maybe it's time somebody had a real conversation about whether you should even be making these decisions alone anymore, she said. And there it was, finally, out in the open where I could see it clearly. You're out here every day by yourself. No one checking on you. Making major decisions about property worth $250,000 with nobody else's name on anything. That's not healthy, Vernon. That's not safe. The shop went quiet again. Quieter than before. Todd's head came up sharp. Heather, he said low, warning. I'm just saying what everybody's thinking, Todd, she said. Your father is 72, living alone, and he just stood here and told us he's the sole owner of a $250,000 operation with no oversight from anybody. That should concern this family a lot more than a plasma table. I let that sit in the room a moment. I wanted every single person there to hear exactly what she'd just done. Out loud, with a witness present, in front of my own son. Say the word you're circling, Heather, I said quiet. Go on. Say it plain since you've already said everything else plain enough this morning. She hesitated, just a fraction, and then she said it. Maybe it's worth having a doctor look at whether you're competent to keep managing something this size on your own. There it was, confused. Incompetent. The words families use when what they actually mean is, I want what's yours and I don't want to wait for it, honestly. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to understand that. It would have been easy, right then, standing in my own shop, listening to my son's wife suggest I might need a doctor to sign away my own judgment. Easy to shout. I did not. Diane, I said instead, will you note, for the record, the date and the substance of what was just said here? Already writing it down, Vernon, Diane said, and she was, pen moving steady across a legal pad she'd pulled from her folder. Heather's face went a shade paler. That's not a threat, I'm just saying. I know exactly what you're saying, I said. You're saying it in front of a licensed attorney, your husband, your brother, and me, on a Saturday morning. 3 days after your brother tried to remove equipment from a building he had no legal claim to. I've built things out of steel for 41 years, Heather. I know load bearing when I hear it. And I know exactly what's holding this idea of yours up. It isn't concern for my well-being. That's not fair, she said. Her voice had lost its edge now. Gone thinner, closer to panic than certainty. Fair would have been asking me directly. Weeks ago, instead of measuring my equipment for a trailer hitch and calling it basically already done, I said. I checked. That's all I've done this whole time, Heather. Checked the paperwork, checked the numbers, checked what was true. You're the one who's been checking nothing, hoping nobody else would either. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Cody stood by the flatbed, looking at his sister like he was seeing something in her he hadn't let himself see before. Todd stood very still, jaw tight, looking at his wife the way you look at somebody you thought you knew completely, right before you realise you didn't know them at all. We're leaving, Heather finally said. To no one in particular, and she climbed into the flatbed's passenger seat and stared straight ahead through the windshield. Cody lingered a moment. Vern, he said, quiet, just to me. I really didn't know. About the lease. Any of it. I want you to know that. I believe you, Cody, I said, and I meant it. I don't think you're the one who built this. I think you're the one who got handed a shovel and told to start digging without anybody showing you the property line first. He nodded once and climbed into the flatbed. They backed out of my driveway and drove off toward town, the hand truck rattling empty in the flatbed's rusted bed. Todd stayed behind, stood in the middle of the shop a long time not saying anything, looking at the plasma table, the pressure vessel rig, the ledger and the lease still sitting side by side on the workbench where Diane had set them down. Dad, he finally said, did you know she was going to say that? About competency. I suspected, I said. It's usually the last card people play when the first ones don't work. I've seen it happen to other men in this town, Todd. It's an old play. Doesn't make it hurt less to hear it from your own family. I'm sorry, he said. His voice cracked slightly on the word. First real crack I'd heard in him, in longer than I could remember. I should have asked more questions. About all of it. The loan, the lease, any of it. I just let her handle things because it was easier than arguing. I know, son, I said. Easier isn't the same as right. You've got things to sort out with your wife. Not my business to solve for you. But I want you to hear this, and I'm only going to say it once. He looked at me, waiting. None of what happened today was about the plasma table, I said. It was never really about the shop or the tools or even the money, though the money's real enough. It was about whether anybody in this family was going to bother asking me a direct question before deciding what was mine belonged to somebody else. Your mother made me promise this shop and that house would stay together, as long as there was breath in either one of us. I kept that promise today. I'd like to trust you to help me keep it going forward, but that's yours to decide, not mine to hand you. Todd nodded slowly. For the first time in longer than I could remember, he looked at me the way he used to as a boy, not checking anybody else's face first for permission to feel what he was feeling. I want to help, he said. I mean it, Dad, whatever that looks like. We'll see, I said. Meant that plainly. Not as a rebuke, as the honest truth of a man who's learned the hard way that trust gets rebuilt one true thing at a time, the same way you true an axle, tap by tap, listening for where the metal still rings clean. I thought Saturday would be the end of it. It wasn't. A story that pretends one good confrontation fixes everything is a story lying to you about how people actually behave when they're cornered and scared. Heather did not go quiet. 3 days later, Diane called me, her voice tighter than I'd heard it in 9 years of handling my affairs. Vernon, I need you to sit down for this. I'm sitting, I said, though I wasn't, not yet. I sat down at the kitchen table as I said it. Heather retained her own attorney Monday morning, a younger fellow out of Sheridan named Pratt. He filed paperwork this morning, requesting the court appoint a guardian ad litem to evaluate your capacity to manage your own affairs, citing, and I'm reading this directly, concerning patterns of isolated decision-making regarding assets exceeding $200,000 without family consultation or oversight. I sat with that a long moment. She's actually doing it, filing on it. She is, Diane said. I want you to understand, this is a real filing, Vernon. Not an idle threat over a dinner table. Cost her money to file it, $450 in court fees alone, plus whatever she's paying Pratt. Tells me she's either desperate enough to spend money she doesn't have, or somebody's advising her this is a real path forward. What happens now? A hearing gets scheduled. A judge reviews the petition. If it has merit on its face, and given how it's worded that's not impossible, a guardian ad litem gets appointed. They evaluate you, interview your doctor, your family, report back. Worst case, that report comes back unfavourable, and the court appoints a guardian over your financial decisions. Best case, the judge looks at the filing, looks at the lease, looks at the ledger, and throws it out at the first hearing. How confident are you in the best case? Diane was quiet a moment, choosing her words carefully, the way she does when she wants to be exactly honest instead of comfortably vague. Very confident, Vernon, given what we have. But I want to be clear. These hearings are public record. They can be humiliating regardless of outcome, because the filing alone puts you in a position of proving your own competence to a stranger, in a courtroom, in front of whoever shows up. I've seen good men win these cases and still feel like they lost something in the process. I thought about that a long time after we hung up, walked out to the shop, sat in Marion's rocking chair, thought about the exact shape of what Heather had done. She hadn't just threatened me at a dinner table. She'd taken a private family conflict and turned it into a public legal proceeding, one that would require me to sit in front of a judge and prove formally, on the record, that I was still fit to run my own life. I thought about my own father, years back, near the end, when a cousin of mine tried something similar over a piece of farmland. How much it aged him, sitting in a courtroom defending his own mind to people who'd never once asked him a real question about his life before deciding he'd lost the ability to answer one. I wasn't going to let that happen to me the same way. Not quietly, not privately. If Heather wanted this fight in a courtroom, on the public record, that was exactly where I'd make sure the whole truth came out. All of it. In one sitting. With nowhere left for anybody to soften it afterward. I called Diane back that same evening. I want to countersue, I said. Not out of spite, out of necessity. I want every piece of this laid out formally, on the record, in front of the same judge who'll hear her petition. The lease, the ledger, Cody's loan status, the competency threat, made in front of witnesses, at my own dinner table, and again in my own shop. All of it, documented, dated, sworn. That's exactly the right instinct, Vernon, Diane said. A well-documented response doesn't just defend against her petition, it exposes the motive behind it. Judges notice when a guardianship filing conveniently follows a failed attempt to seize $250,000 in assets. I'll have the response filed by Friday. The hearing was set for 5 weeks out, a Tuesday morning at the Sheridan County Courthouse, the same building where I'd recorded that lease 11 years before, never imagining it would one day get read aloud in a courtroom to defend my own mind. Those 5 weeks were some of the longest of my life. I'll be honest, there were nights I didn't sleep well, lying awake, wondering whether a stranger in a black robe was going to look at 72 years of my life and decide, on one afternoon, that I'd become something less than capable. But I also want to tell you what kept me steady through those 5 weeks. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was Marion's ledger, sitting on my kitchen counter where I could see it every morning. 41 years of proof, in her own hand, that I'd built something real, something documented, something no judge with any sense could look at and call the work of a confused man. Diane built the case carefully. A sworn statement from Wade Pruitt about the axle repair, the $340, the 90 minutes, the precision of the work. A statement from Wade's brother-in-law on what he knew about Cody's loan status, framed carefully as public knowledge, not gossip. She subpoenaed the bank's pre-repossession notice directly. It came back showing the balance now at $49,100 with accrued interest. The 6-week window had shrunk to under 3 before physical repossession. She also, at my request, had Marion's ledger professionally appraised alongside the shop equipment. The appraiser, a careful, soft-spoken man named Harlan Beck, out of Casper, specialises in valuing fabrication and machine shops for resale and insurance. He drove out himself on a Wednesday morning, tape measure and clipboard in hand. Spent close to 4 hours going piece by piece through every machine I owned. Todd came by that morning. Wade Pruitt too, having heard through the grapevine that the appraiser fellow was coming out. The three of us stood back and watched Harlan Beck work, quiet, methodical, running his hands along the plasma table's rails, checking the pressure vessel rig's certification plate, noting serial numbers into his clipboard, one machine at a time. This plasma table, he said at one point, more to himself than to any of us, This is a commercial unit, well past what a hobbyist would ever own, properly maintained too. You can tell by the railwear pattern. Even, no favouring one side. He looked up at me. You do your own maintenance. Every bit of it, I said. 41 years, never once let a machine run rough because I was too proud to grease it right. He nodded slowly, writing something down. When he got to the certified pressure vessel rig in the back corner, he let out a low whistle. You know how rare it is to find one of these still in service, properly certified, in a private shop this size? Most independents your age either never got the certification or let it lapse decades ago because the paperwork's a headache. He ran a hand along the frame. This alone, given the certification and the condition, I'd value north of $26,000 at resale, and that's conservative. Wade let out a low whistle of his own. Vernon, I had no idea half of what was in here was worth that kind of money. You never once said. Never seemed worth bragging about, I said. It's just the tools I use to do the work. Harlan Beck finished his walkthrough a little after noon, shook my hand, told me his written report would follow within the week. When it arrived, it valued the total equipment inventory at $211,000, higher than my own rough estimate. Once he accounted for the pressure vessel rig's rarity and 2 custom jigs I'd built myself with no direct commercial equivalent. Tools so specific to my own methods, no catalogue anywhere carried a comparable price. I read that appraisal 3 times the night it came in. $211,000. Built from a $210 second-hand welder and a rented pole barn, 41 years back. By a man some people in my own family had recently suggested might not be fit to manage his own decisions. I did not gloat over that number. I want to be honest about that too. I sat with it quietly, the way you sit with any hard-won fact. Thought mostly about Marion, about her handwriting in that ledger, about the promise I made her in that rocking chair 20 years back, about how close I'd come to losing all of it to a tape measure and an assumption nobody bothered to check. In the 3rd week of that 5-week wait, something happened that neither Diane nor I planned for. It changed the shape of everything that followed. I was in the shop on a Thursday afternoon, welding a repair on a stock trailer gate for a rancher 2 towns over. I heard a diesel engine slow down on Anvil Road, turn into the Grange Hall lot across the way. The county was hosting its fall equipment auction that weekend. Trucks and trailers and farm implements, lined up for preview before Saturday's bidding. I didn't think much of it until I heard raised voices carrying across the lot. Set my torch down, walked to the shop's front window. A tow truck from First Range Bank's recovery contractor had Cody's mobile welding rig up on its bed, hydraulic winch groaning as it dragged the flatbed's front end up the ramp. Cody stood in the parking lot, arms out, saying something I couldn't hear from that distance. The tow operator, a heavy-set man in a company jacket, kept working steady and unbothered. The way a man works when he's done this exact job 100 times and stopped being moved by the shouting a long time ago. Heather's car was there too, parked crooked, like she'd pulled in fast. She stood a few feet from Cody, hands over her mouth, watching the rig she'd helped guarantee get winched onto a flatbed in front of half the county. The fall auction had drawn a crowd, ranchers and shop owners and their families out for the Thursday preview. All of them now standing around watching the exact thing Diane had warned me was coming. I did not go over there. I want to be honest about that. There was a part of me, a small, ungenerous part, that could have walked across that lot and let them see me watching. I didn't. Went back to my welding. Gloating over another man's collapse was never something Marion would have wanted from me. Never something I wanted from myself either. Wade Pruitt called that evening, having heard about it second-hand from 3 different people by supper time. The way news moves in a town small enough that everybody's business becomes everybody's business inside of an afternoon. You hear about Cody Gill's rig getting hauled off in front of half the county, Wade said. I saw part of it, I said. Didn't stay to watch the rest. Word is Heather's about ready to come apart at the seams over it. Somebody said she was crying in the parking lot, in front of the Hendersons and the Talbot boys, and half the fall auction crowd. $49,000. Gone, just like that. Repossessed in broad daylight. I imagine that's a hard thing to have happen in front of your whole town, I said. I meant it plainly, not as satisfaction. There's no real satisfaction in watching a family come apart. Even a family that's wronged you. You don't sound too torn up about it, Wade said. I'm not glad it happened to Cody, I said. He got handed a shovel and told to dig, without anybody showing him the property line. Same as I told him myself, but I won't pretend I don't understand why it happened. A man can only borrow against a future that isn't coming for so long before the bill comes due, whether or not anybody's watching. That repossession, public and humiliating as it was, did something none of Diane's careful filings could have done alone. It confirmed in front of the whole county, in the plainest terms, exactly what Diane told me weeks before in her office. Heather's guardianship petition had nothing to do with genuine concern for my welfare. Everything to do with a family that had run out of quiet ways to solve a problem they created themselves. Todd came round more in those 5 weeks than he had in the 2 years since Marion passed, stopping by most evenings. Sometimes just to sit in the shop while I worked a small job. Sometimes to ask a direct question, the kind he'd never quite managed before. "Are you scared?" he asked me one evening, about 2 weeks before the hearing, watching me true up a bent trailer hitch on the bench. Some, I admitted. Lying to my son never fixed anything either. Not about the money or even the shop, really. Scared of sitting in front of a stranger who gets to decide, on one Tuesday morning, whether the rest of my life belongs to me. Todd was quiet a moment. "I talked to Heather," he finally said. "Really talked. Not just let it slide the way I usually do." "How'd that go?" "Bad at first. She got angry, said I was choosing you over her. Then she got quiet. Admitted some of it, that she'd been terrified about Cody's loan for months, and hadn't told me because she didn't want me to think less of her family. That she'd convinced herself moving him into your shop wasn't really taking anything from you, since you weren't using it fully anymore." Which I now understand was never true. He looked at me. I told her the guardianship filing was different. That was cruelty, dressed up as concern. I wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to keep the peace at home. What did she say to that? She cried. Said she panicked. Said Pratt told her it was her best shot at fixing things quietly before the bank came for Cody's rig, publicly, and embarrassed the whole family. I told her embarrassing the family was already happening, just in a courtroom now instead of a driveway. He rubbed his face, tired. "I don't know where things stand with us, Dad. I mean that honestly. But I know where I stand with you. Finally, and I should have gotten there a long time before a stranger with a tape measure forced the question." I didn't say much to that. I put my hand on my son's shoulder, the way I used to when he was young and had done something that mattered. Let that be enough for both of us that evening. Diane called me 4 days before the hearing. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard from her before, a kind of quiet excitement, usually hidden well behind her professional calm. "Vernon, I need you to come into the office, today if you can manage it." I drove in that afternoon. She met me at the door herself instead of having me wait in the lobby. When I pulled the original LLC file for the lease, she said, sitting me down across from her desk, there was a second document in the same folder, filed the same week. I nearly overlooked it, because it wasn't what I was looking for. It's a notarized personal agreement between you and Marion, dated the same month you formed the company. She slid it across the desk. I recognized my own signature at the bottom. Beside it, Marion's, unmistakable even in a formal legal hand. "Read the second paragraph," Diane said. I did. It stated plainly in language a notary in Sheridan had witnessed and stamped 11 years before, that both Vernon L. Aldrich and Marion Fay Aldrich agreed the shop building and the house on the adjoining parcel would remain under single family control, undivided as an expression of the promise made between them for the full term of the lease, or until both parties' deaths, to whichever came later. I sat very still, read it twice. She didn't just ask me to promise her something in a rocking chair one night. 20 years back, I said. Quiet. She made sure it got written down. Notarized. Same week we formed the company. I never knew this existed, Diane. I signed a dozen papers that week setting up the LLC. Don't even remember signing this one specifically. She probably had it prepared alongside everything else, and simply had you sign it in the stack, trusting you'd understand its weight if you ever needed to, Diane said gently. This strengthens everything, Vernon. Not just your ledger and your ownership now. A formal, notarized statement of intent from both of you that this property was never meant to be divided. Sitting in a county file for 11 years, untouched, waiting. I drove home that evening, sat a long while in Marion's rocking chair, the notarized agreement folded in my coat pocket. Thought about how many quiet, careful things that woman had put in place over the years, without ever once making a show of it. A ledger hidden in a cushion, a legal agreement filed and forgotten, a rose bed planted along a wall that would still be blooming decades after she was gone. She'd spent her whole life building small, patient defences against exactly the kind of day I was about to face. And she never once asked me to thank her for any of it while she was alive to hear it. I found the second one too, I told her that night, out loud in the empty back room. You really did think of everything. The night before the hearing, Wade Pruitt showed up at my door unannounced, still in his work coat, smelling of cattle and cold air. Figured you could use the company, he said, seeing as you'll be up half the night either way. He was right. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table a long while, not saying much, the kind of quiet that passes easy between two men who've known each other 40 years and don't need to fill every silence with talk. You scared? Wade finally asked. Same question Todd had asked weeks before. Some, I admitted again. Still true. Strange thing, being scared of a piece of paper after 41 years of not being scared of steel, fire, or falling off a rig platform in a Wyoming windstorm. But there it is. You'll be all right tomorrow, Wade said. I've known you longer than that woman's been alive, Vernon. Nobody who's ever watched you work an axle by ear is going to sit in a courtroom and believe you've lost your mind. That judge is going to take one look at that ledger and know exactly what kind of man kept it. I appreciate you saying so. I mean it plain, not as comfort, he said. I'll be there tomorrow too, if you want a second face in that courtroom who isn't getting paid by the hour to be there. I hadn't expected that. It caught me somewhere soft I didn't know was still open. I'd like that, Wade. Thank you. He left a little after 9. I sat up another hour with Marion's ledger open on the kitchen table, reading old entries at random. A hay baler repair from 1994. Custom gate hinges for a church in 2003. A full trailer rebuild for a rancher whose grandson now ran the same operation. 41 years compressed into careful, patient handwriting. Strange, I thought, that the proof of my whole life's competence had been sitting quiet in a rocking chair cushion for 2 winters, waiting for the exact moment it would matter most. The Tuesday of the hearing arrived colder than expected, a hard frost still on the courthouse steps in Sheridan, when Diane and I climbed them together, 8 in the morning. Wade Pruitt was already waiting on the top step, hat in hand. He fell in beside us without a word, the 3 of us walking into that courthouse together like a small, quiet procession. Diane carried the same leather folder, thicker now, the lease, Marion's ledger, the equipment appraisal, Wade's sworn statement, the bank's repossession notice, her own careful notes from the day Heather first said the word competent out loud. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-panelled, a handful of benches, a judge's bench up front with a woman behind it named Judge Ruth Calloway. I'd never met her, but her reputation in the county was for being exactly as patient as she needed to be, and not 1 ounce more. Heather sat across the aisle with her attorney, a young man named Pratt who kept adjusting his tie like it was strangling him. Todd sat beside me, not across from me, its own kind of statement. I noticed Heather noticed it too. Judge Calloway called the petition first. Pratt stood and made his case. Careful, professional, citing concerning patterns and significant unmonitored asset management and the need for protective oversight given the petitioner's advanced age. He didn't mention the plasma table specifically, didn't mention the flatbed or the tape measure or the lease. He built his whole argument on my age and my solitude, as if 72 years in a house without another name on the deed were by themselves evidence of anything at all. Judge Calloway listened without expression, the way good judges do, giving nothing away. Mr. Pratt, she said when he finished, does the petition include any medical evaluation supporting a claim of diminished capacity? Not at this time, Your Honour. We're requesting the court appoint a guardian ad litem to conduct that evaluation. I see. And the petition's evidentiary basis for requesting that evaluation in the first place. The scale of assets involved, Your Honour, and the isolated nature of the decision-making. Isolated, Judge Calloway repeated, flat. Something in how she said it told me she'd heard that particular word used that particular way before. More than once. Mr. Pratt, I'll hear from the respondent's counsel now. Diane stood. Watching her stand up in that courtroom, folder in hand, was one of the steadiest moments of my whole life. I knew whatever happened next, the truth was finally going to get said plainly. In one room. To one person. with the authority to actually settle it. Your Honour, Diane began, I'd like to walk the court through exactly what precipitated this petition, because the timeline matters a great deal more than counsel has represented. She laid out the lease first. The recorded document, 11 years old, the LLC's sole ownership resting entirely with Mr. Aldrich. She laid out the Saturday morning at the shop, the flatbed, the plasma table, the attempted removal of equipment belonging to a business entity without its owner's consent. She laid out carefully, factually, without a hint of theatrics, that the word competent was first spoken aloud not by a doctor, not by a concerned family member acting alone, but by the petitioner herself. Standing in Mr. Aldrich's own shop, 3 days after her brother tried to remove $211,000 of equipment from a building he had no legal right to enter. Your Honour, Diane continued, I have here a sworn appraisal valuing the equipment inventory at $211,000. A sworn statement from a long-time customer, Wade Pruitt, attesting to Mr. Aldrich's continued precision and competence, performed as recently as 3 weeks ago. And I have here, she held up the cloth-bound ledger, 41 years of handwritten financial records, kept not by Mr. Aldrich himself, but by his late wife, Marian Aldrich, documenting every transaction this business ever completed, right up until the final weeks of her life. This is not the estate of a confused man managed in isolation, Your Honour. This is the estate of a man who has, for 4 decades, kept meticulous, documented, verifiable records of every decision he's made, alongside a wife who did the same. She let that sit a moment. Pratt rose halfway out of his seat. Objection, Your Honour. Counsel is speculating as to motive. Overruled, Judge Calloway said, not even glancing up. This is a competency hearing, Mr. Pratt, not a jury trial. I'm entitled to consider motive when weighing evidentiary basis. Continue, Miss Ostrom. Diane nodded and turned a page. Your Honour, I'd also like to enter into the record a statement regarding the loan I referenced. Cody Gill's mobile welding equipment was repossessed publicly 3 weeks ago at the Cutbank Junction Fall Equipment auction preview in front of numerous county residents, an event that predates this hearing by 18 days and that the petitioner has not disclosed to this court in her filing. Pratt shifted in his seat. I watched him glance sideways at Heather, the look of a man realising his client hadn't told him everything relevant to the case he was arguing. Ms. Gill, Judge Calloway said, looking directly at Heather now, is that accurate? Was your brother's equipment repossessed prior to this filing? Heather's hands were folded tight in her lap. Yes, Your Honour, she said quietly. It was. And you filed this petition after that repossession, not before? Yes. I see. Judge Calloway made a note, unhurried. Something settled in her expression, the look of a woman who's just watched the last piece of a puzzle click into a shape she'd already half suspected. Ms. Ostrom, please continue. The petition before this court was not filed out of genuine concern for Mr. Aldrich's welfare, Your Honour. It was filed 3 days after a failed attempt to remove commercial equipment from a leased property by the sister of the man who attempted that removal, whose own personal guarantee on a defaulted loan of $49,100 is, as of this filing, under active pre-repossession review by First Range Bank of Sheridan. I'd ask the court to consider whether this petition represents genuine protective concern or a legal manoeuvre undertaken in the wake of a failed financial plan. The courtroom had gone very still. I watched Heather's face the whole time, watched the colour drain slowly from it, as Diane laid out piece by piece exactly the sequence of events that led to that morning, in a room where nobody could soften it into something smaller afterward. Judge Calloway looked over her glasses at Pratt. Counsel, is the court to understand that the underlying dispute here concerns a failed attempt to relocate equipment belonging to a company the respondent solely owns, and that this petition followed shortly after that attempt failed? Pratt hesitated. Your Honour, my client's concerns about Mr. Aldrich's welfare are separate from... They don't sound separate to me, Mr. Pratt, Judge Calloway said. They sound sequential. She turned a page in front of her, unhurried. I've reviewed the petition. I've now heard the respondent's documentation. I am not inclined to find sufficient evidentiary basis to order a capacity evaluation based on a filing that appears to have originated 3 days after a commercial property dispute, supported by no medical evidence whatsoever, and directly contradicted by 41 years of the respondent's own financial records. Judge Calloway turned another page, reviewing Wade's sworn statement, then the equipment appraisal, then finally Marion's ledger itself. Opening the cover carefully, the way you'd handle something you understood was more than paper the moment you touched it. "This is remarkable record keeping," she said, mostly to herself, turning a few pages slow. 41 years, consistent handwriting throughout, dated entries, running totals that reconcile year over year. She looked up. "Mr. Pratt, has your client's petition offered any counter-evidence disputing the authenticity or accuracy of this ledger, or the appraisal Ms. Ostrom has submitted?" "No, Your Honour," Pratt admitted. "We have not challenged those documents specifically. Then I have on one side 41 years of documented, verifiable financial competence, a sworn customer statement attesting to continued skilled work as recently as 3 weeks ago, and a professional appraisal establishing significant, well-managed assets," Judge Calloway said. "And on the other side, a petition alleging isolated and concerning decision-making, filed 18 days after a public repossession event involving the petitioner's own brother and her own personal financial guarantee, with no medical evidence whatsoever." She set the folder down. "Mr. Pratt, I want to give you one final opportunity. Is there anything in the record, anything at all, that speaks to an actual, observed decline in Mr. Aldrich's cognitive or financial functioning, separate from this property dispute?" Pratt hesitated a long moment, glancing again at Heather, who would not meet his eyes. "No, Your Honour," he finally said. "Not at this time. Thank you, counsel." Judge Calloway turned back toward our side of the room. "Ms. Ostrom, is your client's countersuit seeking any relief beyond dismissal of the petition?" Diane stood again. "Your Honour, we are formally requesting the court note, for the record, that this petition was filed without evidentiary basis and in apparent proximity to a failed attempt to remove leased commercial equipment from Mr. Aldrich's property. We are not seeking sanctions at this time, though Mr. Aldrich reserves that right should any further filings of this nature occur." "Noted," Judge Calloway said, and made another mark on the page in front of her. She looked at me directly then, for the first time since the hearing began. "Mr. Aldrich, is there anything you'd like to say before I rule?" I stood. Hadn't planned to speak. Diane told me I likely wouldn't need to. But something in me needed to say one thing plainly, in that room, to that judge before this was over. "Your Honour," I said, "I built a business out of a $210 welder and a rented pole barn 41 years ago. I never inherited a dime of what I have. My wife kept every number in that ledger with her own hand, right up until the week she passed. She wanted to make sure nobody could ever stand in a room and tell me what I built wasn't real, or wasn't mine, or wasn't something I understood clearly enough to protect." I paused a moment. The next part was harder to say out loud than I expected. I've spent 41 years learning to hear the difference between steel that's sound and steel that's about to fail. True metal rings clean when you tap it. Stress metal rings flat, hollow, like something's wrong underneath even if the surface looks fine. I've applied that same listening to people my whole life too, Your Honour, whether I meant to or not. And I'll tell you plainly, nothing about the last 5 weeks has sounded like concern for an old man's welfare. It sounded like panic, dressed up neat and filed with the county, from people who ran out of quieter ways to get at something that was never theirs to begin with. I looked briefly at Heather, staring at the table in front of her now. "Not at me. I don't raise my voice easy, Your Honour. Never have. My late wife used to say the loudest thing about me was how quiet I got right before I fixed something truly broken. I will not sit quietly, though, while somebody uses my age, a fact I can't do one thing about and wouldn't want to, as a weapon to take what I spent a lifetime earning with my own 2 hands. That's all I have to say." I sat back down. The courtroom was silent a long moment. Then, to my surprise, Todd stood up beside me. "Your Honour, may I add something? I'm his son." Judge Calloway studied him a moment. "Briefly, Mr. Aldrich." Todd's voice shook slightly at first, then steadied. "I was there, Your Honour, the morning my wife's brother tried to remove equipment from my father's shop. I heard her say the word competent out loud in that shop, days before this petition was filed. I didn't understand what I was watching at the time. I understand it now. My father has run that business, alone, since before I was born, without a single mistake anyone in this family has ever pointed to. The only thing that's changed is somebody decided his estate looked easier to take than it did to ask for, honestly. He glanced at Heather briefly, something sad and final in his face. I'd asked the court to see this filing for exactly what it is. Judge Calloway nodded slowly, writing something further. Thank you, Mr. Aldrich. Sit down, please. She was quiet a moment, reviewing the folder one final time, the courtroom holding its breath around her. I want to say something before I rule about what this court exists to protect, she finally said, setting the folder down flat. Guardianship proceedings exist for a real and serious purpose. There are men and women in this county who genuinely need protection, whose families genuinely fear for their safety and their finances. And this court takes every such petition seriously on its face, because the cost of dismissing a legitimate concern is far too high. She looked out at the room, but this court also has a responsibility to recognise when the language of protection is being used as a tool of acquisition. I have sat on this bench 11 years, and I've seen this particular pattern more times than I would like to count. An ageing parent builds something of value. A family member, frightened by their own circumstances, begins to frame that parent's independence as a danger, rather than what it actually is, which is simply a life that does not currently require anyone's permission. She let that sit a moment in the quiet courtroom. This court is not in the business of confusing the two. Judge Calloway nodded slowly. Petition denied, she said. The court finds no evidentiary basis for a capacity evaluation. Mr. Aldrich, you're free to go. Ms. Gill, I'd advise you and your counsel to consider very carefully what you file with this court in the future, and why. She struck the gavel once, quiet, almost gentle, and it was over. 5 weeks, one folder, one ledger, done in less than 40 minutes. Diane squeezed my arm as we stood. It's done, Vernon. I turned and looked across the aisle at Heather. She wouldn't meet my eyes at first. Staring at the table, Pratt was already clearing, folding papers into a briefcase that had cost her, by Diane's later estimate, close to $2,200 in legal fees for a filing that lasted less than 5 weeks and accomplished nothing but exposing exactly what it was built to hide. It's basically already done, I said. Quiet, just loud enough for her to hear it. I watched her flinch at her own words, handed back to her, the same phrase Todd had used at my kitchen table 3 months before. The phrase that started all of it. Funny how that works out, when the truth's on your side instead of just your hoping. She didn't answer, stood, gathered her coat, walked out of that courtroom without looking back at either of us. I never did hear her say another word to me directly. Not that day, not for a good while after. Wade Pruitt clapped me on the shoulder outside, on the courthouse steps, the frost long since burned off by the mid-morning sun. Told you, he said. Nobody who's ever heard you true an axle by ear was ever going to believe you'd lost a step. I want to tell you what happened to the people in this story. I think it matters. A story worth telling honestly doesn't stop the moment the gavel falls. It keeps going, the way real life always does, past the moment everybody in the room thought was the ending. Cody Gill lost the mobile rig and the flatbed both, permanently. The bank sold them at auction 3 weeks after the repossession, for a combined $19,400. He still owed close to $30,000 on a loan for equipment he no longer possessed. He took a job eventually, as a hired hand at a fabrication shop 2 counties over, learning the trade properly this time, under somebody else's supervision. The long, slow way. The way I'd learned it myself 41 years before. He called me, of all things, about 4 months after the hearing. I owe you an apology, Vern, he said. Awkward. The way young men are when they're trying to say something true for the first time in a while. I should have asked more questions before I ever picked up that tape measure. I was scared, and scared makes you stupid, I guess. It does, I agreed. Took me most of my 20s to learn that lesson myself. You're learning it a little younger than I did. That's not nothing, Cody. Heather and I don't talk as much these days, he added. I think she's still pretty angry at everybody. Including herself, maybe, though she'd never say that part out loud. I didn't push him on that. Some things a man has to work through on his own timeline, not mine. Heather and Todd separated 5 months after the hearing, not over the shop specifically, over everything the shop had forced into the open, the loan she'd hidden, the guardianship filing she'd pursued without telling him the full truth of her reasons. 8 years of small decisions made, without really consulting the man she married. I want to be plain, I take no joy in that. Never wanted to see my son's marriage come apart, whatever I thought of the woman he married. But I can't say I was surprised. A marriage built on one partner quietly managing the other tends to come apart eventually, one way or another, once enough truth gets let into the room. Todd moved back into town, into a small rental 2 streets over from the shop. He started coming by most mornings before work, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to help me on a job. I taught him to true an axle by ear again, the way I'd taught him as a boy. This time he stuck with it long enough to get it right, tapping a bent drive shaft 4 separate times before he finally heard the difference between true steel and stressed steel. There, he said, the 5th time, grinning like the 12-year-old boy who'd laid his first clean weld. That's the flat sound. I hear it now. Now you'll never not hear it, I told him. That's how it works. Once you know what to listen for, you can't unknow it. I did not rush back to full trust with my son. Honest truth, it would be a lie to say 8 years of small surrenders get undone in a single courtroom afternoon. But I watched him, week after week, choose the harder true thing over the easier soft one. Again and again. Slowly, the way you'd true a badly bent piece of steel. A little heat and a little patience at a time. Something between a straightened back out. Something I'd honestly worried might be gone for good. The workshop itself is busier now than it's been in years. Word got around the county, the way word always does in a place this size. Ranchers who hadn't brought me work in a while started showing back up. Some of them saying plainly they wanted to support the shop that beat back a guardianship claim built on nothing but greed. I fixed 41 jobs in the 6 months after that hearing, more than the 2 previous years combined, grossing just over $38,000 in that stretch alone. Proof enough, if anybody still needed it, that my 72-year-old hands hadn't lost a single bit of what they'd always known how to do. I put $6,000 of that money towards something I'd been meaning to do for 2 winters and hadn't found the strength for. Hired a carpenter, a young woman named Sarah Voss, apprenticed under an old cabinet maker in Sheridan before he retired. She restored the back room properly, refinished the cedar walls Marion picked out, rebuilt the worn rocker joint on her chair, the one I'd meant to fix for years and never had. Built a proper glass case for the ledger so it could sit open on display, 41 years of her handwriting visible to anyone who walked in, instead of hidden inside a cushion where it might have stayed forever if I hadn't finally sat down in that chair. I also did one more thing, quietly, that I haven't told many people about. Wade Pruitt's granddaughter, a young woman named Callie, 17 years old, started coming around the shop some Saturdays, curious about welding, asking real questions instead of polite ones. I started teaching her, the same way an old man named Ellis Rourke taught me, 41 years ago, in a machine shop in Casper. No charge, just time and patience. Somebody once did that for me and I never got the chance to pay him back directly before he passed. I bought Callie her own starter equipment, a decent stick welder, a proper helmet, gloves that actually fit her hands, instead of the oversized men's pairs most beginners get stuck with, close to $900 altogether. I told her the same thing Ellis Rourke told me the day he handed me my first real welding hood. You don't owe me a thing for this. You owe it to whoever you teach next, 20 years from now, when you're the old one and somebody young walks in curious. She looked at me like that math didn't add up right, the way young people do when kindness comes without a hook attached. That's it? She asked. You're not going to make me apprentice for free for a year first or sign something? Signing something is exactly what got us all into trouble around here this year, I told her. She laughed, not fully understanding the joke yet. I suspect she will one day. The way most people understand a joke about paperwork only after paperwork has cost or saved them something real. Paying it forward to a stranger's grandchild is the closest thing I've found to settling a debt. I never got the chance to settle with the man who taught me. I still sit in Marion's rocking chair some evenings, in the newly restored back room, the cedar smelling fresh again for the first time in years, her ledger sitting open in its glass case, the evening light catching the worn cover. I talk to her sometimes, out loud, the way a man does when he's spent 46 years used to somebody answering back and hasn't quite unlearned the habit. I kept it together, I told her, the evening after the carpenter finished, the shop and the house, just like I promised. I don't believe in miracles, not the kind you see in movies. But I believe Marion knew 20 years before any of this happened exactly the kind of trouble that comes for a man who builds something real, and then dies without writing the truth of it down somewhere nobody can argue with. She protected me from beyond her own passing, one careful entry at a time. In a ledger she never once mentioned to me while she was alive. She trusted I'd find it exactly when I needed it most. Not one day before. I never did raise my voice through any of it. Not at Cody with his tape measure. Not at Heather across a courtroom aisle. Not at my own son when he finally understood what his silence had nearly cost us both. I raised paperwork instead. And patience. And 41 years of proof that a life built honestly, one weld at a time, doesn't need anybody's permission to keep standing. The plasma table still sits exactly where I built its base. Same concrete floor, bolted down tight, doing exactly the work it was always meant to do. Cody Gill never touched it again. Not once. Not even the day he came by, humbled, to ask if I'd take him on properly, as a paid apprentice, learning the trade the honest way this time. I said yes. Not because I owed him anything. Because Marion always believed a man could be taught his way out of a bad decision, if somebody patient enough was willing to teach him. And because I finally understood, sitting in her chair with her ledger in my hands, what the whole point of everything I ever built really was. Never the steel, never the tools, not even the money. I pay Cody $19 an hour now, standard apprentice wage for the region, plus overtime on the jobs that run long. I've told him plainly more than once that his last name being Gill and his sister's mistakes are two entirely separate ledgers in my mind. I intend to keep them that way, as long as he keeps earning it. He's careful now, in a way he wasn't before, double-checking every measurement, asking before he touches anything that isn't explicitly his to touch, the way a man gets careful once he's learned firsthand what it costs to assume. Some mornings, watching him work a bead clean and slow along a trailer frame, I think about how strange it is. The same tape measure that started this whole mess still sits in a drawer in my own shop. Cody's still. I never made him give it back. I thought about throwing it out more than once. Never have. A man keeps a reminder like that around sometimes. Not out of bitterness. Because it's useful to remember how a good year and a bad year can start from the very same object, depending entirely on what's written down somewhere to settle the argument before it turns ugly. It was always about what got handed down, and to whom, and whether the hands receiving it had earned the right to hold it steady. I want to tell you one more thing about Cody, because it matters, and because a story that only tells you about the villain's downfall and never about his climb back up isn't the whole truth. About 6 months into his apprenticeship, a rancher named Otto Beckstrom brought in a hay rake with a cracked frame, an old machine, older than Cody, welded together by 3 different owners over 4 decades with 3 different skill levels. It needed patience more than skill. Cody spent 2 full days on it, grinding out bad old welds, cutting fresh steel, laying new beads clean and slow. I watched him from across the shop, not saying much, the way I do when a man's learning something that only sticks if he works it out mostly himself. "You're not rushing it," I said when he finally set his hood down. "You told me rushing's how a man ends up measuring somebody else's plasma table," Cody said, and he almost smiled saying it, though there was still something careful in his face when he said it, like he wasn't sure I'd want the joke thrown back at me. "I did say that," I said. Glad it stuck. Otto came to pick up the hay rake 3 days later, ran his hand along the new welds, and looked at Cody with the particular respect a rancher gives a man who's fixed something right the first time. "Good work, son," Otto said. "Didn't expect it done this clean." Cody thanked him, quiet, and I watched something settle into my nephew-in-law that afternoon that hadn't been there the day he showed up with a tape measure and a borrowed extension cord. Call it humility, if you want a simple word for it. I think it was closer to the specific kind of steadiness a man only gets from doing honest work long enough that his hands start believing it before his pride catches up. I paid him a bonus that week. $200, off the books, nothing official. Just a folded bill in an envelope with his name on it. Small money by the standards of everything else in this story. But it mattered to him. I could see that in the way he held the envelope a moment before putting it away, like it was worth more than the number written on it. I never told Heather about that bonus, or about most of what happened between Cody and me in that shop over those months. Some things a man keeps for himself and the person he's teaching, not for a family that's still deciding how to talk to each other again. Diane retired the following spring, handing her practice over to a younger attorney she'd trained herself, a careful young woman named Reyes, who Diane vouched for personally, the same way Wade Pruitt once vouched for me to a stranger, without me even asking him to. Before she left, Diane came by the shop one last time. Not for business, just to see the place she said she'd come to think of as more honest than half the courtrooms she'd spent her career in. "You built something real here, Vernon," she said, standing in the back room, looking at Marion's ledger behind its glass. "I've represented a lot of men with a lot more money than you and a lot less to actually show for it. I want you to know that meant something to me, watching this case unfold the way it did. Not every client gives a lawyer the chance to do her best work in service of something true." "You did good work, Diane," I said. 9 years, and you never once needed me to explain myself twice. That's rarer than you'd think, in my experience." She laughed at that, and we shook hands, and she told me to call Reyes directly if anything else ever came up, though I've told her, and I meant it, that I hope nothing ever does. Diane called me one more time, about 8 months after the hearing, just to check in, the way she does with clients she's come to think of as more than paperwork over the years. "How's the shop, Vernon?" "Steady," I told her. "Cody's coming along. Callie's coming along even faster, truth be told, though I'd never tell Cody that to his face." "And the LLC? Any more surprises hiding in that folder I should know about?" I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in a while thinking about that whole mess. "Not that I've found, though I've started keeping my own ledger now, alongside Marion's, same way she did. Every job, every dollar, dated and signed. Figured if it ever matters again, I want it sitting in plain sight this time. Not tucked in a chair cushion, waiting for somebody to finally sit down long enough to find it." "That's a good instinct," Diane said. "I've had 3 other clients this year alone facing something close to what you went through, Vernon. Aging parents, adult children getting nervous about the future. Somebody deciding paperwork's easier to obtain than an honest conversation. I've started recommending all of them do exactly what you just described. Document everything plainly while you're still able to, so nobody ever gets to argue about what's true after the fact. Glad something good came out of it." "Past just my own hide," I said. "More than you know," she said. "I used your case, anonymized of course, as a teaching example at a legal seminar in Cheyenne last month. A dozen younger attorneys in that room hadn't fully appreciated how often these guardianship petitions get weaponized rather than genuinely needed. Your ledger made the point better than any textbook I could have handed them." I sat with that a long moment after we hung up, thinking about Marion's careful handwriting, ending up as a teaching tool in a room full of lawyers 3 states over. 41 years of patient bookkeeping, travelling further than either of us could have imagined when she first opened that cloth-bound ledger back in 1985. I want to tell you about the last Sunday dinner of that whole year. It closes something the first one opened, and I think you should know how a family finds its way back to something like normal, even after a season like the one I've just told you. The Grange Hall was decorated for the holidays by then. Somebody's idea of garlands strung along the folding tables. The same tables Marion had eaten at for 30 years before me. The same hall where Heather had first said we figured we'd get it done before the weather turns, casual as anything, 10 months before. Todd came alone again, the way he had for months now, though he mentioned, quiet, over the ham, that he and Heather had started talking again. Careful. Mostly about practical things. Custody wasn't quite the word for it, since there were no children involved, but there was a house to sort out. Old habits of politeness neither of them seemed ready to fully let go of yet. "I'm not saying we're getting back together," he told me, low, just between us, while the rest of the table talked over each other about the church's Christmas program. "I don't know if we ever will. But I don't hate her, Dad. I think she got scared, and scared people do things they'd never do with a clear head, same as Cody did. I'm trying to understand that without excusing it. That's about as fair a way to hold 2 true things at once as I've heard," I said. "Your mother would have been proud of you for getting there on your own, without me pushing you toward it." He was quiet a moment. "Do you think she'd forgive Heather? Mom, I mean, if she'd lived to see all this?" I thought about that a long while before I answered. It deserved a real answer, not a comfortable one. I think your mother forgave people slow and carefully. The same way she kept her ledger, I finally said. Every entry checked twice before she trusted the number. I don't think she'd have rushed to forgive Heather. But I don't think she'd have closed the door forever, either. She always said the measure of a person wasn't the worst thing they did scared. It was whether they ever got honest about it afterward. I looked at my son. Has Heather gotten honest about it, Todd? Really honest. Not just sorry she got caught. He thought about that longer than I expected. I think she's getting there, he said finally. Slowly. She apologised to me. Really apologised. Not the kind where she's also explaining why it wasn't really her fault. She hasn't reached out to you directly. I don't know if she ever will. That's her decision to make in her own time, I said. The door's not locked, Todd. Just not standing open either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that's all right too. Some structures, once they've been stressed a certain way, you patch them and they hold fine. And some you're better off building fresh instead of trusting the old world. I honestly don't know which this is yet. Neither do you. That's an honest place to sit for a while. Wade Pruitt's granddaughter, the young woman I'd started teaching, came by our end of the table that evening. Hands still faintly smelling of flux from an afternoon session in my shop. Showing Todd a bead she'd laid on a scrap piece of angle iron. Proud of it, the exact way Todd himself had been 30 years before. I watched something soften in my son's face, watching a new hand learn the same trade his father built a whole life out of. She's good, Todd said, turning the scrap piece over in his hands. Really good, for how new she is. She listens, I said. That's most of it, at the start. The rest comes with time, same as it did for you, same as it did for me. I drove home alone that night, same as after the very first Sunday dinner in this story. Both hands steady on the wheel, this time, not white-knuckled with a cold, uncertain anger. I passed the shop on the way up my own driveway. Dark now, except for the small motion light over the bay door. I sat in my truck a moment, just looking at it. The building Marion picked cedar for. The building a stranger once measured for a trailer hitch like it was already his. The building that had, in the space of one hard year, revealed exactly what it was worth, and exactly who it belonged to. I went inside, same as always. Before bed, I walked out one more time to the back room, flipped on the light, looked at Marion's ledger sitting open behind its glass, her handwriting catching the lamplight the same patient way it had for 41 years. Good night, I told her, the way I have most every night for 2 winters now. I meant it exactly the same way I'd meant it every night before all of this started. Because in the end, that was the plainest truth of the whole story. Nothing that mattered most had ever actually been at risk. Not really. Not the promise. Not the love behind it. Only the people who never bothered to ask before deciding otherwise had been wrong about what they were dealing with. And now finally every one of them knew it. There's a thing I tell Callie now, most Saturdays. Somewhere between showing her how to set her amperage right and watching her lay her own bead clean for the first time, without me guiding her hand. A shop like this one isn't really made of steel and concrete. Not at its core, it's made of every honest hour anybody ever put into it. Stacked up quiet, year after year, until the stack gets tall enough that nobody with any sense can knock it over, just by measuring it wrong. I think about Marion every single day. I walk out to that back room. I think I always will. Right up until the day somebody else has to decide what happens to all of this, after I'm the one who's gone instead of her. I've already started that paperwork too, plain and clear. No cushions, no hidden ledgers. So whoever comes looking for the truth of what I built won't have to search half as hard as I did. I sat down with Diane just last month and updated my will, formally naming the LLC's succession terms for the first time since I formed it, 11 years back. Todd is the primary beneficiary now, on the condition, spelled out plainly in the document, that the shop and the house remain under single ownership, undivided. The same promise Marion and I made each other in a notarized paper, one neither of us thought to mention out loud for over a decade. I left Callie a smaller interest too, 5%. Enough to guarantee she'll always have a voice in what happens to the equipment she's been learning to respect, whether or not she's related to me by blood. Family, I've decided, at 72, isn't only the people who share your last name. Sometimes it's the ones who show up on a Saturday morning wanting to learn something true and keep showing up, week after week, long after the noise of everything else has quieted down. Diane filed that updated will on a Tuesday, same day of the week the hearing had fallen on, though I hadn't planned that on purpose. When she called to confirm it was recorded, I told her plainly it felt like closing a loop I hadn't fully realised was still open. Some loops take a whole year to close properly, she said. You did it right, Vernon. Slow, documented, no shouting. That's rarer than you'd think in my line of work. I thanked her, and I meant it. Hung up the phone, walked back out to the shop one more time before dark, the way I have most every evening of my whole adult life. Made sure everything was locked up tight and exactly where it belonged. The plasma table sat quiet under its cover. The pressure vessel rig sat certified and ready in its corner. And in the back room, behind glass, 41 years of a good woman's patient handwriting caught the last of the daylight, coming through the east-facing window she'd asked for. All those years ago. So she'd always have the morning light while she watched me work. I raised no fists in this whole story. I never needed to. The only weapons I ever carried were cold patience, plain truth laid flat on a table, where everyone could see it, and 41 years of proof nobody could argue with, because Marion made sure of it, one careful number at a time, long before I ever knew I'd need her that badly again.